Out of habit, we call our society democratic. We have elections, sort of, and politicians still pander to the public with idiotic platitudes. And we do hear establishment types drone on about our democracy. But that's all meaningless. For one thing, no one's allowed to discuss the fact that our elections are manipulated by a constant barrage of propaganda, influence peddling, and are sometimes clearly rigged. God forbid anyone talk about that. Or the fact that the U.S. has organized color revolutions around the world, and now at home. Or the fact that no matter who is in power, ordinary people are ignored. Or the fact that everything worth owning is owned by the smallest number of criminals who control the political system, the media, Wall Street. They own all the agricultural land, like Bill Gates and his pals, and run the international get-togethers to determine our fate at places like Davos, the annual Bilderberg meetings, and by now, probably inside the gates of hell itself. So what do you call that system? It's some strange mixture of digital snoopery and general fuckery practiced by big tech and big intelligence, overbearing bureaucratic domination by all levels of our government and corporate masters, and nonstop propaganda and gaslighting that tries to convince us that we the people still have power and that governments and corporations actually care about us when in fact they're ramrodding a global-wide revolution down our throats and of course stealing everything that isn't nailed down. Brave New World meets 1984, meets The Matrix, meets The Hunger Games, meets Ready Player One, meets Black Mirror, meets whatever. You get it. Some people call this authoritarian. That's pretty vague. Some say we're lurching toward fascism. Others call it communism. I call it totalitarianism. Some people think that's a bit of hype. I certainly don't. Totalitarianism has the word total in it. It describes a system in which the government has total knowledge and control over its people, in which every aspect of your life is examined, graded, and judged by an omnipresent and all-powerful authority. But even totalitarian regimes need public support. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the Nazis or Bolsheviks just bulldozed over people and terrorized them into submission. Yes, there was brute force and terror, no question, and also adoring crowds. You go and look at some of those Nazi rallies from the 1930s. You can't fake all that adulation. Those people loved what was happening in their society. They felt like winners again. Even the boring and evil Stalin had his adoring mobs, whipped up by propaganda, of course. And everyone knows about the mob insanity orchestrated by Mao in the 1960s when the entire nation of China lost its mind during its Cultural Revolution. And now today. And this is where Facebook and Twitter come in. So think of a few things. First, we are now a society with near complete access to data, not just by governments, but by ordinary people. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we are a society that engages in non-stop public shaming of people who step out of line. Anyone who falls short of the current standards or is guilty of bad think. By now, this probably includes almost everyone. So normally, you'd think this can't be sustained. You can't have a never-ending Salem witch trial. You would destroy your society. You'd think that at some point, sanity would return, that the Cultural Revolution would be scaled back, that we would get back to sanity. You'd think that a society can't continue in which so many people, ordinary people, not just the rich and powerful, but everyone, are intimidated to the point of terror at stepping out of line from ever crazier demands. Well, don't expect the crazy people to get tired of their power trip. No matter how much pushback, they will fight to the end. And besides, the people at the very top of our food chain, they don't have a problem with any of this. In fact, I think they love it. Why? Because keeping the people at insane levels of hatred has a real upside for our oligarchs. One is that it destroys public discourse, which is actually great if you want to destroy a democratic society and create a totalitarian system. If you're going to have democracy, you've got to have compromise. We don't all have the same interests and ideas. It's actually a good thing. We all come from different places. We have different jobs. We have different goals. Some of us are from big cities. Some of us are from the countryside. We think differently, but we all still have to live together. And if we want this ideal of democracy to work, well, that means you have to compromise. And people actually once believed in free speech. It was a point of pride. They'd say things like, it's a free country. and they believed it. It was okay to have different opinions. Well, that was a different universe. Twitter and Facebook have destroyed that. Now we have ideologues and fanatics. No compromise, just a broken democracy. So that's one thing that happens when the Twitter mob goes after its ever-expanding list of targets, death of compromise. Here's another thing, even worse. The longer this continues, the more terrified people will become, and the more tightly controlled their behavior and thought will become. Think of the angry Twitter mob as a pack of barking dogs. Dogs barking at you to get in line, don't question the official narrative, and raise your fist to the revolution. And now, right on cue, we hear calls for the government to step in. We learn, to our shock, that Facebook puts profits before public safety. So, of course, the government has to control social media to keep you safe. But it won't stop the barking dogs. You'll still have to build back better and support the Great Reset. And the sock puppet mob, supported by our oligarchs, well, they'll still be out there to keep you on point, because that's what barking dogs do.